Dia, welcome to the podcast and great to have you on. For those who don't know you very well or haven't heard too much about what you do, you're a leadership communications expert with well over 2 decades of experience coaching top CEOs, founders, and innovators to speak powerfully and amplify their impact. You were actually an auctioneer, if I understand this correctly, and
As a hobby, yes, that's right.
use those skills to create a groundbreaking program designed to help women and all ambitious professionals ask for more and get it in their careers, businesses, etc. You've written a book called Ask Like an Auctioneer: How to Ask for More and Get It, which serves as a bit of a practical guide. I'm sure we'll get into that. But in your role as a communications catalyst, you've been hosted by several major corporations, the likes of Quartz, Salesforce, Google's X Team, and Dropbox. You've also helped play a pivotal role in securing the Summer Olympics, the 2016 Summer Olympics in Rio. I've got to ask, Dia, why make the pivot from auctioneering as a hobby through to creating a formalized program to help professionals?
None of it is a pivot. They're like layers on top of each other. So I've been doing leadership communications work for 2 decades. And right in the middle of that work, I took a sabbatical. Like most adults, we hit a wall. And instead of punching through it and hurting myself, I decided to take a year off. And take a break. And during that time, I went to auctioneering school just as a little adventure. And when I got back to the Bay Area where I live in California, I realized that I wanted to take what I learned at this funny little adventure of auctioneering school and turn it into what I think of as an impact hobby. So I started for fun and because I care about advancing women and girls, started doing fundraising auctioneering for women-led nonprofits and nonprofits benefiting women and girls. And about 30 or 40 auctions into my impact hobby, I realized that what I was learning from the auction stage was useful to layer into the communications work I was doing to think about how professionals can ask more strategically, how we can make sure that we don't leave any money or opportunity on the table, opportunity being an important part of it, because part of my leadership communications work is always, what is it? Business fundraising, securing partnerships, launching how founders and executives can use their voice to launch products more successfully, close deals. It's about making the asks that really can advance your business and then designing the story and having a leadership voice to support that. So it wasn't really a departure. These are just two things that layer into one another and work together.
Dear, most founders I work with are in the seed to Series C stage, meaning they've raised anywhere from their first round of venture funding to a third major round. And often they can tell me their customer acquisition cost, which is what it costs them to acquire each new customer down to the cent. They would obsess over things like funnel conversion rates, ad spend, sales cycle length. But if I ask them, what's the acquisition cost of a customer who came to you specifically because of your distinct point of view as a leader, most would have no idea how to answer. And I'm curious, in your 22 years of experience, when do you see that oh no moment when they realize their invisible leadership voice, meaning they haven't developed or articulated what makes their perspective unique, is actually costing them real money in how much they have to spend to acquire customers?
It's customers. When you say customers, I think about users because I'm in tech very much here in the Bay Area and just adjacent to Silicon Valley. But what I'm really focusing on and what really matters is how their voice can impact relationships and partnerships and investment. And sure, customers can come in the form of their first big partnership or their first big customer that can really be one of those early adopters, maybe their first enterprise level customer because they invest in relationship, and those early big customers that can be a bunch of users for them really recognize that they're investing in the product when they give that product an opportunity to engage with their employee base, or they're doing a partnership that gives them exposure to their customers, but also that they're making an investment in that founder. That they're like, I believe what this founder's building. I know it's going to drive a huge amount of value for us. We want to be your first customer. And in that way, having a strong leadership voice can maybe cinch one partnership that can represent a whole bunch of users. And I think that in my experience working with founders particularly, they don't realize the potential for them to not have the potential for a deal to fall through because they don't have a voice that is strong, clear, and actually distinct from their venture becomes really apparent when they have a really critical meeting at 3:00 on Friday and they still haven't figured out what they're going to say. Very often they know what they're going to say because they've been fundraising, right? They know they can do a product demo, they can tell the story of the company, but it's time that they actually recognize that they are not their venture. Their leader or founder voice is a go-to-market tool for their venture.
Is there a way that your CEOs and founders could actually quantify the kind of money that they're spending? And maybe I could paint a bit of a scenario to help with that, which is...
Sure. And before you do, I'll just say that a missed opportunity is hard to quantify.
True.
Disproving a negative.
Certainly.
But I can give you some examples of clients who've secured deals that generate a lot of value for their organizations, that if they missed it, it would be expensive. Go ahead, give me a scenario.
So I was thinking, a B2B tech founder spending, say, thousands of dollars, if not tens of thousands of dollars per month on LinkedIn ads and search engine marketing and other paid channels to generate leads, but they haven't as yet posted a unique perspective on LinkedIn in, say, well over 6 months. Hasn't been on a podcast articulating what makes their approach different. And when they do speak, it often sounds like they're repeating their marketing team's messaging.
Correct.
So based on what you've seen, I was going to ask, how much money is that the founder leaving on the table? Not because their marketing strategy is wrong, but their personal voice isn't doing the work that it should be doing to reduce their dependency on paid acquisition.
I couldn't quantify that. I have no idea. But you can imagine that you can imagine a world in which folks understand, particularly when you're new, that folks might understand your product. But when we say yes to a product that's paired with a founder's voice that we can get down with, we can engage maybe even much earlier. So it might not be that So I have no way of being able to quantify what that might be, but I can say that you can use your voice as an accelerator. Imagine I have to see an ad on LinkedIn for your particular SaaS solution. What is it? I don't even know what the numbers are. You can tell me 7, 10, 12 times before I might click through and actually check it out or join one of their product demos or webinars. But if I pair that with a founder that I've heard from that has a compelling thing to say about the future of that industry, about the direction of the market, about a particular approach or maybe their core operating principles that led them to build what they built. You pair that with seeing their product. If I become a user in half the time, I would imagine that over time that can make a big difference in terms of time to money.
Okay. I believe this is something that you mentioned the last time we spoke, that most founders believe communication is a skill-based transaction tool, meaning they think it's just about delivering information effectively, whereas you are of the opinion that it is more of a high-stakes communication, is actually a strike point for leadership, meaning it's a strategic moment where you can drive decisions and secure resources. Can you break down what founders and CEOs misunderstand about the relationship between how they show up in communication moments and how efficiently their businesses acquire customers? What's the connection that they're missing?
We do business with people that we know and trust, correct? So if I can know and trust you quickly, I'm going to accelerate saying yes to a partnership or a way that you can accelerate your business and grow your user base. I think that the difference is, I was on a conversation earlier today and somebody said, messaging was really like, it's a thing. And I'm like, yes, but I'm in the business of the step before the messaging, which is, what is it as a founder do you have to say? And that's what I mean by it's your strike point for your leadership. Understand what it is that you have to say and then figure out how to say it such that it can actually hook us in and have us say yes to you. Those are separate things. So in a lot of cases, I need to work with customers, or I need to work with founders and leaders to help them articulate what is so completely innate for them and name it and claim it in such a way they can actually talk about it as if it's not assumed that everyone else operates that way. So many founders I work with are just, they're like, duh, this is how we do it. Or this is how I do it. And for everyone else, it's no, not duh. For us, it's, we want to understand how you were able to build that product as quickly as you were doing. How do you design your engineering teams such that they can produce what they do? And when I can understand who you are, now you're leading me down a path for deepening relationship with you. And then from there, we can talk about the tactics of the product itself. So I think about skill acquisition and your leadership voice as separate. I think Miles Davis said a quote, something like, it takes a lifetime to sound like yourself. Because it's one thing to be like a really good trumpet player and to be able to do scales and be very skillful with your instrument. And it's another thing to have your voice come through those skills. So I'm wanting to separate that too. So one, yes, you want to acquire the skills that help you successfully execute whatever instrument you're playing, in this case, your leadership voice, but you also need to be able to know what you're expressing. And in that case, especially founders who are so often, they're so focused on the build in early days, when the business starts to get big enough that they have to have a voice that's separate from just describing the product, that's when things get a little bit like it's time to take a look again and go, what is your core leadership philosophy now that you have a team? What are your operating principles to help you build this as quickly or as successfully as you did? What is the future that you see in our industry that helps us want to follow you along your path to building out your product into its next iterations? Like that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but would I be right in saying that it's almost like developing your unique fingerprint from a messaging point of view, but also
beautiful,
casting a bit of vision as well, if not the vision?
Totally. I'll give you an example for folks who are listening. If you're in the technology space, I had a client who, she's head of engineering, a co-founder with two other founders. The other founder was running finance and operations, and the third founder was CEO. She was running engineering, and they were going into an M&A discussion with potential acquirer. And I know we're talking about customer acquisition. I'm talking about a different kind of acquisition at this point, because founders are going to face a lot of really critical communications moments that can be transformative to their business, whether it's fueling customer acquisition or fueling growth because they're getting a big check written to them, or fueling product development through key partnerships, et cetera. So she was going to be representing the product and the engineering, the technology side of the story in front of the executives that were making a decision about whether they wanted to continue on with the acquisition discussion. And her first take was, I'm going to go in and do what I always do, which is a product demo and talk about the problems we solve with the product. And I was like, okay, but you have product leads to do that. You're an engineering leader. You're a co-founding engineering leader. What this acquiring company is looking at is not just the product they're buying, because it's going to change and grow and iterate from here. What they're looking for is, what is your engineering leadership? Because that's what they're buying. They don't want to know just what you built, but how can you bring your engineering leadership here and have an impact in a greater way? And she was like, what do you mean? What engineering leadership? And this is a perfect example of the things that so many founders find so innate for themselves that is actually something that they can make, like almost separate a little bit, pull out of their most implicit way of operating and make it more explicit. So we did that work to uncover, how did she build the engineering teams that she did? And it turns out that she was like, documentation is everything. And I'm like, talk about that. What does that mean? Help me understand. And we were able to get basically 5 or 6 components of her sort of engineering philosophy and leadership playbook that acquiring company could, 1, look at the product that they'd already had so much traction with, and 2, go, oh, I see, as we continue, this is an engineering leader that can help impact the culture here, that can continue to expand. Like, we know what we're working with here. We see how she moves fast and whether it's a fit or not a fit. So that's what I mean by your voice. What is it that you have to say? And then we'll figure out how you're going to say it.
Right.
And again, Vinay, I wish I could say, how much does it cost you to miss the mark on that? I have no idea. A billion jillion? 1,000 trillion?
You've developed something called the platform map, which is a
Yeah.
framework that helps leaders identify their authentic voice. For people who
Yeah.
listen to this for the first time, the platform map includes your purpose platform statement, which is your guiding principle as a leader, your provenance, which is your leadership origin story, your point of view and playbook, meaning the transformation you believe is inevitable and how you uniquely cause that transformation, and your principles, which are your values in action. Now, this is what I'd like to explore if we could, which is if we think about each component of the platform map, not just as self-discovery work, but as a customer acquisition cost reduction infrastructure, meaning these elements directly help reduce how much you have to spend to acquire customers. How does each component specifically change the economics of customer acquisition for a B2B tech company? And I know you can't really quantify it, but if you can provide some inputs that would help CEOs and founders wrap their minds around, especially those who are numbers oriented, wrap their minds around why this would be worth investing the time and energy into, it'd be great.
Sure. Okay, so this is going to be a big story, so everybody strap in. So the purpose platform statement isn't content, okay? And the platform map can be, think of it as like source material for your leadership voice. And the first component is your purpose platform statement, which isn't necessarily content. I run an intensive a couple of times a year, and I just completed the fall one. We're in fall time here in the United States. Just finished the fall one last week. And we did have one person in there whose purpose platform statement turned out to be something she could actually use as content. But your purpose platform statement is about the stance that you have and the role that you play in the world. So are you somebody as a founder or a leader? Are you somebody who's a rule breaker? Are you somebody who's a peacemaker? Are you somebody who's a truth teller? Are you somebody who you're designing a statement that you can use as a lens for making choices about the content that you might draw on in those critical communications moments, partner discussions, industry discussions, showing up on panels, hosting partner customer events, etc. So I use this as a way for you as a founder to hold yourself accountable to your highest and most aspirational self. I have one client, I'll give you an example. As a founder, his purpose platform statement was something like, I'm a champion for mastery of the good idea. Okay. He's not saying that out loud to anyone in the world, but when we're thinking about preparing him for the most critical customer conversations as he's setting up his sales teams for landing big deals that can put tens of thousands of users at a time into his platform, we're going, hey, it seems to me like you're not championing any ideas, much less the right good ones here. You're just like being rote. I don't know what are you actually standing up for here? And we could hold him accountable to making sure that he brought a point of view, that he had an idea that wasn't just a good idea, but the right idea for that moment. So he could step into his role as a champion for the right good idea and then bridge that to the story of his venture, of the product that they were building. So that first one is really a lens. When it helps founders show up more courageously. When you show up more courageously, in a way that speaks from a true stance that's really you. This is what we mean by speaking authentically, which I'm sure founders always get that feedback. Just be you, man. Just be authentic. But we don't know what that means. If I told you to just be authentic, Vinay, would you know what to do? No, but I can look at a set of talking points that a marketing team puts together and then that doesn't sound at all like the founder, and then look at it and go, okay, founder client, we know you're a champion for the right good idea. There's 700 ideas in here. Which one is the right good idea that we want to highlight today? What do you want to let go of? What do you want to hold on to that brings your unique voice forward? Okay, so great. There's that. Providence, and I'll give you like a customer acquisition story about this one. Providence is about telling an origin story for a founder, from a founder, in a way that is a lot less about your resume and a lot more about what drives you. Because the chances are that if you're already past seed stage or into Series A, and the reason you're getting in the rooms that you're in is because you're already credible. We don't need your resume. Yet how often do we hear founders say, I graduated MIT. I mean, I'm in the United States, so I'm going to make US-centric references. MIT, although many of my clients right now are not from the US. I have a Brazilian client right now who went to MIT, but is building a business in LATAM. I graduated MIT, and then I spent 6 years at McKinsey, and then I went to 2 large SaaS companies. I launched 7 products, and I generated $100 million in ARR, and now I'm a founder of it. Yeah, guess what? We already know that, number one. And number two, the people who are responsible for vetting who ends up in the room, whether it's at a tech conference or a customer meeting, or you're getting in to do a pitch to the executives that can write you a check that will power the next phase of your growth, whether again through a customer, acquiring a first customer, or looking for investment, they've already vetted you. So that's not a compelling founder story. What we want to know is, why are you here? What drove you, and why are you important now? So I'll give you a quick example. This is not a founder story. This is an executive, a very seasoned executive of a very large SaaS company that many people who are listening would recognize, okay? And he's a leader in financial services, and he had underwritten a very large session at a very important financial services conference that happens in the United States every year. And he had underwritten 2 very influential athlete voices that bridge athletics and business. Okay. So he had 2 famous people on stage. One woman called Allison Felix. I don't know. Do you recognize that name? So she's an American Olympian who was sponsored by Nike. And then the story is that she got pregnant and Nike dropped her. And so she said, okay. And then she built her own brand. And she's awesome and very iconic. And also flanked on the other side of the panel was Derek Jeter, who is an important baseballer in the United States. Okay. And he came to me and was like, all right, so I sponsored this session. I'm new in this role, and I need to establish myself with all 500 potential customers in the room. This is an opportunity for him to have people tap him on the shoulder right after and book calls with his sales teams. That's what this is about. And we were talking about, okay, how are you going to introduce yourself in the room? He was going to be on that panel with those 2 folks, and somebody else was going to moderate it. And he was like, I don't know, because I'm not an athlete. I haven't picked up a football or a baseball or a basketball in 25 years. I haven't run a mile since middle school. So what am I doing here? And so we uncovered that question with designing a Providence story for him, which was about what he's always been driven by. And it turns out that he's always been driven by being part of something significant. And financial services at that time was at one of the most significant moments in its industry's history. It was coming out of the pandemic. There was no growth anywhere to be found. Inflation was nuts. People were freaked out. And he was a voice in a very significant moment in time in his industry. So it positioned him as a wise asset, and he could speak to the significance of this moment in financial services as a platform for the discussion he was going to have with these other 2 athlete entrepreneurs. He didn't have to compete with them and be part of their athlete story. He could carve his own, and now we don't just know what he's done. They rattled off his accolades in his resume, but we understand why he's there and who he is. It's context for your accomplishments. So if that closes the gap between you and those 500 potential customers in the room, and they go, that guy understands what we're up against right now, let's find a time to talk to him. We're talking about time to customers shorter. Can I give you a $sign for it? No, I cannot, Vinay. I think it's a jillion. That's probably what that's worth. So at a certain level, your Providence story is about helping draw people closer to you by helping them understand what you're driven by as context for your accomplishments and to contextualize why you now. Does that make sense?
It certainly does. I'm just thinking of perhaps a CRO who is perhaps caught up in the
That's exactly what that role was,
okay.
by the way, who you're pointing.
Not
Yeah.
necessarily involved in M&As or partnership deals, but is just very focused on the day-to-day needs to acquire customers and scale growth. How would you talk to him or her about this idea of building up their purpose platform statement?
Purpose platform statement is before Providence. We always start with it. And I would say, at your highest and best, who are you being and what kind of impact do you want to have?
Okay.
And that's where I'd start. Who are you being and what kind of impact do you want to have? And then if you're going to craft the narrative that sets up your sales teams for success, okay, or you're talking directly to your sales teams, how are you making sure you're holding yourself accountable to that role that you want to play and the impact that you want to have?
And in a similar vein, for perhaps a founder who's not necessarily involved in any M&A type roles at the moment, how would you talk them into thinking about their provenance and really clarifying, being able to articulate that well?
Early on, there's the most basic way you can articulate your provenance is, I have always been driven by fill in the blank. That is why fill in your accomplishments. I have always been driven by fill in the blank. That is why I fill in the accomplishments. If you can do that, you're signaling to the room what you're driven by and what they're actually investing in. Because we know, especially in the early stages of a founder's journey, when there is no product, maybe there's some really terrible version of the product that's going to exist in a year. What we are writing checks to, what we are saying yes to advising roles, how we are supporting your organization is by investing in you, the founder. So if I can hear a provenance story from you that makes me go, look, they're building a great product, the market is huge, the time horizon is accurate, feels right, we think the problem is big enough that the exit opportunity is significant. And I really believe, because this founder is so driven by fill in the blank, I'm investing in his or her drive. I believe in them because we're investing in the founder. Because the chances are the product you're building today is either going to look different or not even exist in a future iteration.
Right. I believe the third component is point of view and playbook and the
Beautiful
principles. Could you talk us through that and how it?
Yeah. So point of view and playbook, I like to start by saying there's a point at which you are not your venture. Mm-hmm. You've got a product in market. You've got teams running that stuff. And now you want to take a step back and notice, what do I talk about in the world that is a topic that I can own in the conversations I'm having? What is my point of view on that topic? And what transformation am I trying to cause in that topic area? And then how might I be able to point to my venture as one way in which that point of view and playbook is coming to life? For example, I worked with a client who's like a big market maker. He's not a founder. He's an in-house professional, but he's somebody who's created a bunch of markets for like large SaaS enterprises. And his point of view, his topic we articulated, and it took us a while to get to because he was like, I know I'm a business leader and I grow businesses, but that's not really, I don't actually care about the product. What I really care about is this other stuff that's going, like he couldn't quite articulate what he quote unquote does and cares about until we got to his point of view and playbook exercise. And we were able to uncover that what he talks about is something he calls trust economics. He's like, I don't want to talk about business growth. I want to talk about the economics of trust. So when he's sitting in a conversation about business leadership, he's going to drop the economics of trust as a topic that he cares about. And he can point to the businesses that he's grown and how the economics of trust have played out in that. And how he's paid attention to the economics of trust and what impact it's had on the business growth that he has led. Now, Once we identify, oh, the economics of trust, that's the thing you actually care about. What point of view do you have on it? What transformation are you trying to cause in it? Here's an example transformation statement. He was like, I want to see a world in which every single business leader pairs their business model with a trust model. And then he developed, and I was like, then if we're going to deal in the economics of trust, what's your playbook for doing that? And he was able to articulate 5 or 6 sort of key pillars to what it means to pay attention to and use the trust economics to help grow your business. We could think of examples like, this is a little old and I hope it's global enough, but after the pandemic, Brian Chesky, the founder of Airbnb, came out and talked a lot about how they had redesigned, whatever you think about Airbnb, this is just the thing I heard him talking about a fair bit. He was like, we redesigned how we work more in reflection of a design business than a technology business. And I'm paraphrasing here. But design, he's a design guy, but owns a hospitality technology. So topic, separate from the venture itself. So when we do that, we can then have a more elevated conversation. Another client was going into an acquisition discussion, founder, and I was like, well, what are you going to talk about? And he's like, I'm going to do the thing. I'm basically going to take his pitch deck in there. And I was like, okay, fine. We get to look under the hood of the business, but like, you're meeting with the other CEO. What do you really want to be talking about? And it turns out that his point of view in Playbook is all about what he calls the future of fintech for him was about autonomous finance. And we were like, what is that? Now we're on to something. So he could sit with other CEO shoulder to shoulder and talk about the future, this fintech company, the acquiring one, and his fintech company, the one to be acquired, and talk about their points of view about the future of the business. And he could talk about, he didn't own a completely autonomous, what he calls autonomous finance technology product, but he could say, I use autonomous finance as a lens as we think about the future of product in our platform. And so he could talk about, so now he gets to talk about very pragmatic items around his actual product that he's building, but he can also talk about his point of view, the way he sees the future of the business or of that domain. And that is a more sophisticated, elevated, aspirational, but real way to have a voice that is alongside your venture, not just you parroting the marketing materials of your venture. Do you hear that?
Principles. How does that come into sync with what you've just shared?
Folks who are listening, think about the leaders that have impacted you. The mentors you've had, maybe the teachers you've had, folks you've apprenticed with, leaders on your team, even people that have been direct reports to you maybe. You think about all those phrases they've offered you that have really stuck to you. I have one from my old mentor. He used to say, Dia, things take a lot longer than you think. And it was such a useful framing for me. Vinay, do you have folks that come from your past that you're like, I always go back to the thing they always said? Something that somebody really something stood out for you?
Probably, but I listen to a fair bit and read a fair bit, so it rubs off on you in a bit of a mishmash, so to speak.
Oh, sure. Yeah. You think about those things that folks might say to you, and maybe as you're walking around this afternoon, it might hit you that, oh yeah, Jane, who I used to work with, she used to always say, fill in the blank. And I had in my intensive this last week, I had a researcher. She's not a founder, but she does have to start raising funds outside of the NIH with family offices and others. And she's very accustomed to her voice in academia, but not out in the world. And she came to my intensive to go, all right, I have to start doing a whole bunch of coalition building around the research I'm doing. She had built out some medical technologies that then were acquired earlier in her career, et cetera. And she shared that she had an old mentor that used to say, every time you're given a mic, speak your mission. He's like, I don't care where it is and if it's inappropriate or whatever. If you're given the mic, find an opportunity to speak your mission. And she told a story about how she took that advice and spoke her mission and ended up acquiring attention and some policy that she'd been fighting for years because she just so happened to have the right people in the room at that moment. So these little pieces of advice that kind of work as like operating principles from the leaders that we work with and influence us, you have your own set of those. But again, they sometimes feel so innate that you forget to name them and claim them. So those become also very useful as you lead teams. So we want to unearth those and start to build a bank of those that we can lean on and use at different opportunities. Organizations build out their entire values statements to, as guiding lights and culture builders for their organizations. You as a leader have your own. Why not make them known as part of your impact as a leader? So that's what principles is all about. And you're right, they are your values, but the way you operationalize your values.
I'm trying to build in my head a connection between the platform that you just talked about and go-to-market strategies, because in a lot of instances, a founder's perhaps entire go-to-market team often can't articulate the founder's operating principles or the go-to-market plan as a whole. While working through what you just described certainly makes a lot of sense from a point of view, how do you recommend ensuring that this trickles down to make a real impact on your teams, or in this case, as we were talking about, go-to-market team?
I mean, this kind of work is reserved for leaders that have to use their voice to have an impact internally and externally. So while it might be useful for your organization to have an entire sales team that workshops their provenance such that they can build quick connection with their new prospects in live conversations, I don't know that in an organization, every single person needs to have a built out platform map. It is for the founders and executive teams. And look, you could be a founder that's running a team of 5, and this can be useful because you are the spokesperson, the champion, the face of the business for now. And it is true that this kind of work is very reserved for the people who are the platformers of the business and the teams they lead. So I don't know that having it trickle down so much is as useful as the question of how do you develop your own as a leader so that you can have it trickle down via your impact.
That certainly helps.
It's a weird thing to say for somebody who sells professional development for a living. For me to say, sure, you could put all 20 of your sales teams through developing their platform app. I wouldn't. Let's talk to your CRO, 2 of your most important, everybody's important, okay? But your lead voices in your sales organizations that you're investing in and as part of your succession plan as you move on or up. So that's who I'm mostly focused on.
Your book is called Ask Like an Auctioneer, and you teach a concept called the zone of freaking out, or ZOFO, which is, I believe, that space between a guaranteed yes, something you're confident you'll get, and that scary no, which feels like a rejection. Now, you say that most people constrain the size of their ask based on what they think that they can get, which guarantees leaving money and opportunity on the table. I am thinking of applying this more in terms of content strategy and thought leadership for B2B companies. And I'm asking this because most founders create what I'd call safe content, educational posts that won't offend anyone, perspectives that are generally agreeable, ideas that the audience will definitely nod along to. That's aiming for a guaranteed yes, but research would show that bold, perspective-driven content builds trust 34% faster. How do you help founders recognize that being safe isn't necessarily helping their customer acquisition issues?
Point of view and Playbook is a really powerful tool in this space. Once you realize when my client said, oh my God, Dia, it's actually the economics of trust that's what I'm actually all about. And business growth is just one of the outcomes of focusing on the economics of trust. It's one thing to know it, and it's another thing to have the courage to actually say it out loud. Because there's going to be moments where you're like, people are going to think this is dumb or too heady or too fill in the blank. And I think watching the moment when a founder or a leader recognizes that Autonomous finance is actually what I think the future of fintech really is. And that feeling they get in their, you can see it on their face. They get almost surprised at how resonant that idea, their own ideas are to them, that it takes their breath away. And then to recognize how powerful it is and then be willing to wield that power around is really important. And again, I can't prove a negative, but what I can do is help you feel the impact of your own point of view and playbook, and then encourage you to be quite Zofo-ish, to let yourself freak out a little bit and say those things out loud. I'll give you a quick example. This client of mine, she's an alumni, came to me earlier this year because she had all her existing customers in her room. And they were preparing for a summit that they were convening. And she called me and said, look, the goal of this summit is to get every single one of our customers to engage in this sort of ongoing roundtable that is going to inform the direction of our product and is going to drive a huge amount of value for our business. And it's not going to cost them anything. And I need to enroll everybody in the room. And we went not to her point of view and playbook, but we went to her purpose platform statement to remind ourselves of who she really is as a leader in this space. And then we wrote her talk from there and made sure that we were making choices about the story we were telling along the way. She made a choice to tell the story of Visa in the 60s, when Visa built basically the pipelines for financial transactions, for credit transactions that were distributed, unowned, but built by the industry to enable millions of transactions to happen in a less complicated way. As an analogy for what she was inviting everyone else in the room to do for their industry. And I could feel her wanting to just tell the lamest, shortest, most efficient, because she's an efficient woman, most efficient version of that story that got the job done but was not compelling. And so we went back to her purpose platform statement and I was like, look, you got to double down on this part of the story, because the better this story is, the more of a killer setup it is for the ask that you'll make later. And forcing herself, and this is the first attribute, by the way, of the 6 attributes of really successful leadership communicators. She forced herself. She loved this story of Visa, loved it. She had been dreaming about, she's like, I've been wanting to tell this story to this group of customers forever, but I just haven't found the opportunity, because I think what we're building is so much exactly like what happened in the 60s and transformed their industry. And I want to tell this. She wanted so bad to tell the story, and she wouldn't let her really do it, really paint the picture. That meant taking other people's time. That meant slowing down and really painting a picture. That meant creating a reality that other people could really see in 3D, and that felt uncomfortable for her. So she chose to be really big in that moment, and that was a core ingredient to everyone in the room later saying yes to her request to replicate that Visa moment, but in their industry. And that drove, she told me the week after, and I was like, how did it go? She was like, we got a yes from everybody. And I was like, how much value is that going to create? And she said, it's going to be worth about $10 million. Again, it's not customer acquisition, but it was going to drive product usage in a way that was going to make them, it was going to have a material impact on the business. And that was a Zofo moment for her. Yep. I can't say, I don't know how to say, she's only going to realize that it would have been terrible if she had told the lamer version of that story, if she'd shied away from taking other people's time when she went after she hadn't got the results she wanted. You don't realize it before, you realize it after. You have to choose to do it and then see how it works and go, oh, I'm going to do that again. Why hadn't I done that before?
So you touched upon this idea of the first attribute of top communicators, which I think you describe as clutch communicators, or people who
Clutch.
powerfully when the stakes are high. So the first attribute is being willing to be big in big moments, which you clarified doesn't mean being loud or demonstrative, but rather being making the more courageous choice in the moment.
Yeah, and for that example I just gave you, her courageous choice was to like slow down and really paint the picture.
I was wondering if you could, I suppose you did, but maybe provide a little bit more definition or granularity so people can help wrap this concept around their heads, which is, can you give me a specific example of what the less courageous choice looks like?
The less courageous choice for her could have been like, oh, I'll give you a new example.
Sure.
Can I work on a new example, Vinay? There's no one moment. It's like success through 1,000 cuts or success through 1,000 choices. It's not death by 1,000 cuts. It's success through 1,000 choices. So I just got done helping 14 different executives prepare for a huge annual conference where they launch big products for an existing SaaS platform we're all very familiar with. And I worked with a woman who started her talk like, hi, I'm so excited to be here today. Thank you so much. Today we're going to talk about, and she went on with the agenda. And I was like, what? You run customer success for all of Amer, and we're going to just get right to, who are you? We don't know who you are. And so she stepped out of her script and took a minute and was like, look, she was new to me. We hadn't built out her entire platform map, but I was trying to get at like sort of some point of view-ish stuff. What's your take on what's going on right now in the market? Since you're with customers, she runs customer success, which now is, what is this new role that's emerging? It's called forward deployed engineering. And yeah, which is about customers have already said yes. Now they're trying to deploy it successfully. And she was like, I feel like the pace of change has never been, I've been doing this work for 20 years. The pace of change has never been as breathless as it is right now. Everybody can feel it. Nobody's saying anything about it. They're just holding their breath and gritting and bearing it. And I was like, let's open with that. And she was like, really? Isn't it stupid? And I was like, let's hear it. So she came up with a version of 5 lines that basically shared her take, and it drew everyone into a shared understanding and a recognition of what moment we're in right now with just the ubiquity of AI everywhere, so many investments in AI, people feeling driven to build agents in every part of their business, but not really sure, having no surety about it. The future is bright or maybe not. It's all a very confusing time. But for her as a customer success leader to be able to acknowledge that very quickly in the room was the more courageous choice. It also gave us an insight into her as a leader out with customers all the time, what her take is, and that we are essentially safe with her as a customer. So that's an example of a more courageous choice. When she crafted her 5-line opener that acknowledged what she spoke to me about in whispers, the moment she delivered it, she was like, oh, that's so good, but I don't know. And then she decided to be big in big moments and commit to it. Instead of saying, hi, my name is, thank you all for being here, and my agenda is.
Could you walk us through the other 5 attributes?
Sure. So the first one is a choice to be big in big moments. And that little example that I gave you is do that 100 times in a year, and you see your impact go up and up. The second one is that you ask very strategically. My example of my founder customer or founder client who invited her customers to be part of a consortium, that was a very strategic ask that was great timing in their business of the right people at the right moment with the right setup. So you're asking very strategically. Third, they totally know their voice. So they can work with their marketing teams or their chiefs of staff or their hired script writer or folks that are helping them put their voice out in the world in a way that they can get something and go, that doesn't sound like me. And then actually be able to help people sound like them because they understand their voice. And we can do that through the platform map is one way to do that. So they really know their voice. This sounds good, but I'm much more of a rebel. So can you find ways to bring a more rebellious tone to these remarks? Find 2 examples that feel a little bit more counterintuitive. They can give feedback to help their teams, help them be successful. The 4th attribute is that they have killer setups. like this example with the woman that told the Visa story, killer setup. And then a choice to slow down and really paint the picture for us was about being big in that big moment. So killer setups for the asks that they're about to make. And the last two are they're really good at bridging their own voice to the business. So that they can be a founder that says the future of fintech is about autonomous finance. And here are the parts of the product we're building that sort of reflect that idea. So that they're bridging to the business. They're not just a spokesperson. They're not just a bullhorn for the business. And then the last one is that they prep like absolute pros. So many of the founders I work with, when folks listening are on their way into an early fundraise or going to secure their first 3 or 4 big clients. I had a client that we figured out that his prep routine was between calls. He goes downstairs. It sounds really silly, but it's part of his own ritual that helped him be really clear. And every time he showed up in conversation, he'd go downstairs, change his shirt, wash his face, and drink a glass of water, and then get back on his next call. And committing to that ritual that helped him start anew in every critical communications moment. Clients that say, yes, let's run it again. Clients that are willing to get in a room with their teams and do a table read before they actually go live. Because it's one thing to understand and have a plan for what you're going to do. It's another to actually feel it once or twice and see if it actually works. So it's about rehearsal, but it's also about ritual.
With the 4th and the 5th attributes, correct me if I'm wrong, but you would need frameworks or analogies to really nail those attributes. Would that be correct?
Some of my clients already know what their rituals and rehearsals sound like. And other cases, they're all custom built. So I'll have clients come to me that are like, how do I prepare for fill in the blank? And I'm like, I don't know. How do you? Because what works for one does not work for another. So you do need frameworks, but it needs to come from you.
Would you recommend perhaps a thought process or two in order to come up with
Yes.
those?
Let me give you one. Don't talk about what you're going to do it. So if you're putting together your deck for the first time, instead of sitting with a colleague and saying, and then I'm going to go to the next slide where I say this, and then I'm going to talk about, I want you to actually role play like you're with your customer or with your potential investor. Have it be, do the work, don't talk about the work. Do you hear that? I have clients, sometimes I do backstage prep sometimes for like big tech conferences, and people come to me and they're like, okay, this is a coaching session. Let me just tell you what I'm going to do. And I'm like, no, do it. And inevitably, it's not going to come out. It's not going to sound the way it did when you did it quietly in your own brain. So don't talk about the work, do the work. And then let it coming out of your mouth reveal what's working and what's not working. And then secondly, be willing to notice what's not working.
I'm thinking of perhaps a CEO or founder who's listening to what we've been saying so far and thinking, okay, maybe my leadership voice is a blind spot. And maybe I am over-relying on paid acquisition because I haven't done this foundational work. But I don't actually know for sure. I'm just wondering. So if a founder wanted to self-diagnose whether their voice is currently helping with things like customer acquisition or being a liability, what would you have them measure or observe this week?
Okay, what a beautiful question. Okay, so I do this all the time with my founders. When we have a longer engagement, we might realize, there's a particular 3-beat setup for a story that they want to use that is working really well for them. And we think they could maybe use it in some of their sales team setups or whatever. Run experiments. So find a different way maybe to talk about the problem, or 2 different ways that you talk about the problem that your product is solving. And then sit down at whether it's coffee chats or laying the foundation for your fundraise or folks who are customer adjacent or whatever, or dinner parties or networking events. Use those setups that feel new to you or different ways of describing the problem and see what happens. But don't just see what happens. Did something happen in a week? I'm saying right in front of you. Did somebody look down at their plate and you can tell they're irritated with what you said? And which, by the way, is not always a bad thing, because resonance can come in the form of a positive reaction, or you could be stopping somebody in their tracks. In my facilitation, when I teach my intensives and we're maybe going through step 3 of the Providence exercise and somebody looks at the floor and gets real quiet, I'm like, what's going on over there? So whether it shuts something down or pushes somebody into being quiet or reflective, or they smile, notice that and then follow it. Oh, I see you're smiling. What's that about? With curiosity and delight, start to notice how people react. Do they end up with a follow-up question that if you do it 5 or 6 times, I keep getting the same question. It's interesting. So let yourself run little field experiments with different ways of talking about something, and they can be low stakes environments. As a founder, if you're like, look, I really want to describe the problem this way, but a bunch of funders, I don't know, have given me feedback that I should say it that way, and you're like, something's still gnawing at me about it, go try it the way you really want to try it with low stakes environments, and just see. It's along the same framework of do the work, don't just talk about the work. Instead of saying, here's what I would say, just go say it and then see what the reaction is. So that's a really fun experiment. And you don't have to convince anybody of anything. You can just try these different stories that you might be telling and noticing, do people smile? Do they furrow their brow? Does it stop them from talking? Do they challenge it? Do they ask another question? And that'll let you know how impactful it is.
Brilliant.
And how impactful you are.
Which is an interesting point, because something that you've said that's kind of stuck with me is your experience of you is not my experience of you. Meaning what you think you're communicating and how others actually receive it are often shockingly different. So a founder might think that they have a distinct voice and perspective, but the market might experience them as being generic or interchangeable with, say, some of the competitors.
Point, yep.
What should a founder or CEO do? Who should they ask, and what specific questions should they pose in order to better gain an understanding of how others perceive them?
Sure. So we're not running 360s. We're not running like 360 feedbacks. That's a different kind of coaching. What I'd be curious about is actually not making it too personal, because it's hard for people when you ask, it's hard for people they want to support you. And I know in the VC space and in the startup space, feedback is very valued and sometimes can be quite harsh. And so it's just a tricky territory. So I would actually depersonalize it a little bit and give people the freedom by using this spiral feedback framework that I like. And it's 2 questions. So maybe you talk about the business or the problem that your business is solving or trying to address. And later you're like, hey, can I ask you for some feedback about how I was sharing the story of the business I'm building? And these are the 2 questions. What did you like? Like, what worked about my story? And what do you want to see more of? And you can do it in terms of content and delivery. So what worked about the content of my story, and what would you like to hear more about? Because people will say, oh, it's good. That's useless to you. But if you say, what worked about my story, they can say, what worked is when you said X, Y, and Z. Or what really worked is how you set it up a little bit like how I usually hear it, except for that one thing you said. Or what worked was when you finally gave me the numbers at the end of the explanation. And then you can say, all right, what do you want to see more of? I'd like to hear those numbers way earlier. I think you could lead with that. Okay. Now, in terms of delivery, same thing. What worked about your delivery was like, you're really friendly. You're so approachable. As a founder, you're really easy to talk to. You seem really enthusiastic. That's great. What do you want to hear? What do you want more of from me, from my delivery? Not what did you like? Oh, no, you're great. And people will say, just be authentic. But But if somebody tells you, just be authentic, do you know what to do? Absolutely not. So what did you like about my delivery? Oh, I love how enthusiastic you are and also how approachable you are. What would you like to hear more of or see more of in my delivery? Look, I know that you are an acclaimed researcher, but it's not at all part of your story. I want to hear more of the part of your research work that really drove you to being here. I want that credible side of your voice to show up more. Yep. You hear that? Yep. And why I call this a spiral framework of feedback is that you can, Vinay, you are making me work so hard. I'm going to send you an invoice when this is over. You and everyone who's listening, I'll send you an invoice. Now accepting all currencies. So it's a spiral it's a spiral framework because you could tell a story, ask for that feedback, tell it again, and then ask for that same feedback. Now, what did you like? And now what would you like to hear more of? You could do it endlessly. And it is such a useful question that is much easier and begs more specific feedback. Does that help? I hope that answers your question.
And quite a useful concept, I think, in terms of getting some real insights and feedback.
And you can do this with customers, couldn't you?
Just thinking the same thing.
You could have a beautiful customer call. Again, maybe it's a little different. If you're acquiring customers using digital ads, et cetera, one customer at a time. But if your customer acquisition strategy is more around like acquiring large customers with a bank of users that then plug into your solution, like you're meeting with people in a room or on a call. And maybe the debrief includes, hey, our founder showed up in this call. What did you like hearing from them? What would you have wanted to hear more of? Help us be successful. And this is great for customers that have already said yes to you and that want to see you win.
Something that you said that caught my attention was, and I'm thinking about bringing AI into the conversation because it's just so prevalent in many people's conversations today. So something you said is you can't have great AI prompts without knowing your voice. Now, we're in this era,
where did I say that? That's genius.
It may have been in a prior conversation that we had. We're in this era where just about every CEO and founder wants to use AI tools to scale their leadership and content creation. But 70% of senior marketers fear that generative AI will make all their thought leadership content sound identical. Can you walk me through specifically how a founder who's done the platform map work can use AI differently than a founder who hasn't?
Yep. I would imagine, look, and this is new. I'm going to admit this is all new for me too, and for my clients. When I'm co-writing scripts with product marketers along with the executive who's going to speak it, and I know that folks listening, you're not all writing scripts, but you can imagine you're designing your talking points, creating the arc of the story, etc., figuring out what those turn of phrases are that set up your solutions, etc. And we're using Claude and ChatGPT and we're using tools all the time to help to co-write with us. And actually, this last intensive I did last week, I had an author in my cohort who, when we broke out to do individual work, when we were in platform map and point of view, she was sitting out on, I do this beautiful intensive at a private vineyard estate in an old remodeled barn. So she was out on the deck with ChatGPT open, like having a conversation with ChatGPT using the prompts that is the exercise for point of view and Playbook. So she was just having a dialogue with them. So I would imagine that giving whatever AI tool that you're using to generate content, etc., you can use the content of your platform map to teach it who you are. Okay? And to have lots of conversations with it and then refer to those 4 components all the time. Like using my Providence story when I'm going to this healthcare provider to have a sales conversation, how might I select which stories to, this is a bad prompt, but you've taught it who you are, and then you can use it to generate content. You are not wrong that I was thinking that recently is just how much of the flattening of culture has happened as a result of social media. I have teenagers in high school, and I guess it's no different than it was in the 80s for me when we were all just reading Vogue magazine and copying all those trends. But there's an ultra There's an ultra flattening of culture. I can't go to a coffee shop in my community that doesn't look like something you've already seen on Instagram 150,000 times. But in terms of content and voice, you're right. AI can flatten a lot of leadership content out in the world. So I think you use the things that matter to you and you talk to your creative tool to teach it a lot about your voice and not be shy about it, such that it can then reflect back to you ideas based on your unique voice.
I know we've covered a bit of ground here.
The entire planet? We did, Vinay. Thank you.
But in this space of helping people amplify their impact and their voice in order to speak powerfully, is there perhaps an area or two that you find doesn't get talked about very much? If so, what would they be?
I can tell you there's something that I don't talk about very much, is that part of amplifying your impact is tolerating your own power in that moment.
Could you explain that? Expand on that?
When we share our big idea that is interesting and compelling, or we tell the longer, more technicolor version of a story, or we have a point of view that cuts through the noise or goes the opposite direction of a trending conversation, that can actually be quite powerful in a room. But often I see my founder clients and other leaders I work with shying away from saying the most powerful thing because they experience it as powerful. And wielding your own power in the room can be intimidating to us, not just to other people.
Right.
Like tolerating how powerful you can be and taking up space that's something I don't talk about a lot, and it's a thing.
Are you thinking more in terms of just being aware of that fact, or is there a certain way to deal with it?
It means that when you say something that's spot on, that feels like cuts to it, and everyone goes, ooh, and then go, ooh, too much? Sorry. Maybe that, okay, let me do it again. And then you'll bury that key idea in a bunch of other words, and now it's a little bit of a vanilla version of itself. That's what I mean by like, you have to talk. Very often, we can handle you. You just can't handle you.
Yep. Okay, brilliant point there. To wrap things up,
Finally.
Listening to this episode,
Say it again. This
episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
Spending time developing a knowable voice that I can use when stakes are high and I know the impact I have in that moment can change the trajectory of everything is worth my time and attention.
Okay. For those listening or watching who would be curious, want to know more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
Everything's at diabondi.com. If you're interested in my wild ride of a book, Ask Like an Auctioneer, How to Ask for More and Get It, which is written such that you'd start it taking off on one side of your country on an airplane and finishing it when you land on the other side and giving it to your best friend. Like, it's written like that. Please pick it up. It's a beach read, but you'll get something usable from it right away. You can find a link to that at diabondi.com or wherever your favorite books are sold. There's also an audiobook version you can find that I narrated. So if you're not sick of the sound of my voice yet, you can go listen to that. And at diabondi.com, you can also find my intensives and just send me a note if you're a founder or a leader in an organization and you recognize that it's time to level up your voice in alignment with your role, that you recognize that you're stepping into a phase in your business where having a more distinct voice is a go-to-market advantage for you. Give me a shout.
Brilliant. Dia, this has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks.